On March 30th, 1972, doors opened in London for an exhibition of one of the most important archaeological finds the West had ever seen, artifacts discovered in King Tutankhamun's tomb. When archaeologists opened the king's tomb, they found it held more treasures than they had ever found previously in any Egyptian pharaoh's tomb. King Tutankhamun was surrounded with vases, statues, weapons, and religious artifacts. The archaeologists found chests full of jewels and even gilded chariots. They found a royal throne covered in jewels and silver, and the mummified king was encased in a solid gold coffin, a sarcophagus. Now, these treasures were impressive, but remember, they had been locked in stone for millennia, never meant for earthly eyes again. What would prompt a culture to surround a dead man with this amount of wealth? The answer lies in the fact that the kings and pharaohs of Egypt played a pivotal role in Egyptian culture. These human rulers were charged with a superhuman task, maintaining social, political, and even cosmic order or Ma'at throughout the land. The pharaoh was God on earth, and as such he had tremendous power, and as such he was inextricably bound up with the ancient Egyptian mythology. It was believed that he would remain powerful in the afterlife and would therefore have need of his most valuable possessions. 330 pharaohs ruled Egypt from roughly 3000 BCE with the first unified kingdom until 30 BCE, when Rome first established a province in Egypt after Augustus Caesar defeated Mark Antony. In this lecture, we'll look at some of the myths of the pharaohs. This includes myths about the pharaohs themselves, including stories of their birth, their life achievements, and their passage after death to the field of reeds. We'll see that these myths tended to hammer home several themes: the pharaoh's divine lineage, his divine right to rule, and his responsibility to sustain order in the world. As we begin, keep in mind that ancient Egyptian myth comes to us in very different forms than classical Greek and Roman myths. The stories we know about the pharaohs come from sources such as tomb inscriptions, funerary texts, magical incantations recorded on papyri, and other engravings, not just from straightforward narratives. Egyptian myths are also often transmitted via pictures or symbols, and they come to us in small units. Lengthy narratives are virtually non-existent. However, I still think it's appropriate to understand the body of writings that focus on the gods and the pharaohs as mythology. Egyptologist John Baines has defined myth as a sacred or a culturally central narrative, and this definition is pretty much how I understand myth as well. In the last lecture, we focused on myths associated with the gods, but there's also a body of mythology attached to the Egyptian pharaohs. And this is in part because the pharaohs came to be seen as the incarnation of the gods. As a result, mythology about certain gods, especially Ra and Horus, was often conflated with stories about the pharaohs. Sometimes Egyptian mythology is also conflated with history, and scholars continue to debate whether certain representations should be approached as accurate historical records or as mythological units. For the Egyptians, myth was largely representative, metaphorical. It translated abstract reality into concrete form. Egyptian gods represented natural forces and elements, as well as human personality traits and moral forces at work. Egyptians explored the natural dynamics of the created world, the social dynamics of the human world, and the moral and theological dynamics of the spiritual world through their mythology. Interactions between gods, nature, and humans, especially in the person of the pharaoh, gave form to abstract understandings of the nature of the universe and to human existence. And the pharaoh was located right at the center of all of this. The pharaohs, as divine representatives on earth, starred in stories just as Horus and Osiris did. In many ways, they functioned as a bridge between mundane human existence and the realms of the gods. One of the earliest known myths about the pharaohs is in the West Kar papyrus, dated to the Middle Kingdom around the 17th century BCE. The West Kar papyrus is named for Henry Westcar, who reportedly came across the papyrus during his travels in Egypt in 1823 or 1824, although Westcar never exactly describes the circumstances under which he found the document. The text on the papyrus describes the birth of 3 kings, sons of a high priest to the god Ra. According to the myth, the high priest's wife, Redjedet, had difficult labor with her 3 sons, triplets. Ra ordered several goddesses to help Redjedet through the births. Now, Ra provided this aid because the 3 sons were destined to end the current royal lineage and to become kings themselves. The goddesses came to the household, but disguised as entertainers, sometimes described as musicians and sometimes identified as dancing girls. The creator god, who gives the breath of life, also came with them, also disguised. When each son was born, the goddesses secretly prophesied that each of them would become a king of Egypt, despite the fact that none of them came from the current ruling household. Now, this couldn't be known widely because the sons would be seen as a threat to the existing royal family. The creator god gave each child the gift of strength so that when he grew to manhood, he could rule with power. Then the goddess Isis declared, "Let us work a miracle on behalf of these sons, so their father, the high priest, will know that we visited this household." They made royal crowns for each son, and they hid them in barley that was in the high priest's cellar. Before they left, they told the high priest that they would return for this barley, and he was to keep it safe for them. He agreed, still not knowing that they were goddesses. A few weeks later, Redjedet asked a servant to make beer, but the only grain left in the cellar to make beer from was the barley being kept for the entertainers who had visited the household. The high priest ordered his servant to use this barley, declaring that he would pay the visitors back for the barley's value when they returned. When the servant entered the cellar, she heard music. She quickly called her mistress, and when the mistress came to the cellar, she too heard the music, and she determined that it was coming from the sacks of barley. The sacks were enchanted. The mistress of the household and her husband rejoiced, taking the enchanted sacks as corroboration of the prophecy about their sons. The priest and his wife also determined that the current ruler might feel threatened if he discovered that goddesses had visited the priest's household instead of his own. Given the prophecies, they became concerned that their sons might be in danger, so they decided to keep the prophecy a secret in the household. Unfortunately, the mistress of the household had an argument with a servant girl in the house, and she struck her. This servant became angry, and she decided to betray the household by revealing the secret of the magic barley sacks to the king. As she set out to reveal the secret, her brother tried to stop her, but to no avail. Then, the story says, quite abruptly, that she was devoured by a crocodile on the banks of the Nile River. The Westcar Papyrus cuts off right here. But the implication is that the 3 young boys' lives are saved, and they grow up to become kings of Egypt. There's a lot going on in this seemingly simple myth. First, the story ties human kings to the gods and goddesses. It even teaches that the gods and the goddesses selected the pharaohs of Egypt, protecting them from threats. Birth narratives such as this one legitimated the rule of individual pharaohs and even suggested that if someone tried to overthrow a pharaoh, nature and the Nile itself would rise up to protect the king. Second, it suggests that elements of the natural world will conspire to protect a king whom the gods and goddesses have selected. The crocodile represents destiny, rising out of the Nile to protect the future kings. It's also possible that the crocodile would have been associated with the crocodile god Sobek, who by the Middle Kingdom had become quite a prominent deity. He was associated with protection in general, and during the Middle Kingdom he became associated more closely with divine kingship. The gods and nature work together throughout the story to make sure that the rightful establishment of a new royal household occurs. The act of devouring the servant girl would also have been a cautionary tale against would-be traitors. At least one scholar, Verena Lepper, has argued that this story may have grown out of historical events. Lepper argues that the figure of Regedet, the mother, may have been inspired by Queen Pharaohs I from the end of the 4th dynasty, some 8 centuries earlier. Now, other evidence challenges Lepper's argument, but the general point that mythology about kings may have been inspired by actual changes in ruling households seems worth considering. In addition to the birth mythologies, the Egyptians recorded other myths designed to illustrate the pharaohs' extraordinary abilities and their importance in Egyptian national life. For example, several tombs spanning 3 centuries contain variations of the same basic myth. The king is buried in the tomb, and he's shown triumphing over a Libyan king. The foreign king is executed, his family is taken captive, and thousands of his animals are taken as booty. This scene is repeated over and over in multiple tombs, so the story probably doesn't record real history. Instead, it's better understood as a paradigmatic myth, arguing that one of an Egyptian pharaoh's most important roles was to protect Egypt from foreigners. Beginning in the 19th century BCE, for over 4 centuries, we find dozens of stories that describe Egyptian rulers defeating their enemies with remarkable displays of skill in warfare, specifically with archery and horsemanship skills. These myths culminate in 15th century BCE myths about Amenhotep II. Amenhotep is depicted rowing a boat of 200 men all by himself, successfully shooting at 4 targets while racing a chariot full speed down a parade ground, and guarding 300 captives for an entire night single-handedly with just a battle axe as his weapon. While these stories are presented as history, and they actually refer to witnesses, they describe physically impossible tasks. It's better to think of them as superhero mythologies, presenting the Egyptian ruler as superhuman in his abilities. But the body of mythology that presented the pharaohs served a political purpose. The stories were ultimately meant to underscore the security of the Egyptian people. The pharaoh embodied political, social, military, and moral security. In the pharaoh, all the reasons that the Egyptian people could feel optimistic about their future were given concrete expression. The mythology surrounding him was meant to reassure the Egyptians as a whole that they could be confident about their place in the world. Finally, there is mythology describing the pharaoh's journey after death. The pyramid texts are among the oldest texts in the world, dating to 2400 BCE. They were found carved into the walls surrounding the antechamber and the sarcophagus of King Unes's tomb in a small pyramid dating to the Old Kingdom period. The pyramid texts include instructions to the deceased pharaoh regarding what to do after death to make the journey to the underworld. For example, one utterance directed at Teti, the first pharaoh of the 6th dynasty, says, "Rise up, O Teti, take your head, collect your bones, gather your limbs, and shake the earth from your flesh. Take up your bread, which doesn't rot, and your beer that doesn't sour. Stand at the gates that bar the common people. The gatekeeper comes out to you. He takes your hand and guides you into heaven to your father Geb. Geb rejoices at your coming, gives you his hands, kisses you, caresses you, and sets you before the spirits, the imperishable stars." The pyramid texts also include a series of refrains declaring that the pharaoh is not actually dead, but alive. A culminating line in the series declares of Unas, the last pharaoh of the 5th dynasty, "He lives, this Unas lives. He is not dead, this Unas is not dead. He has not gone down, this Unas is not gone down. He has not been judged, this Unas has not been judged. He judges, this Unas judges." Now, it's clear from the structure of the text that the dead Unas is meant to be conflated with Osiris, the lord of the underworld and the judge of all dead souls. Finally, the pyramid texts include magical incantations meant to protect the pharaoh's body as he journeyed in the afterlife and to help him rise to the heavens. One of the most famous incantations refers to a well-known myth of the deceased pharaoh's journey in a boat, guided by a celestial ferryman. The pyramid texts include utterances directed to this ferryman. The utterances always praise the deceased pharaoh, linking him with the gods. The material written in the pyramid texts gives us a glimpse into how the ancient Egyptians imagined the afterlife, at least as it was experienced by pharaohs. Other texts pick up on themes and imagery associated with the pharaohs found in the pyramid texts. The Book of the Dead has its origins in spells dating back to 2000 BCE, spells designed to guide the deceased to the underworld. Unlike the pyramid texts, the Book of the Dead includes illustrations, and in these illustrations we find the ferryman to the underworld portrayed with his face turned to look behind him and with a flail on his lap. In the illustration, the deceased pharaoh stands in front of the ferryman, wearing his best linen robe and with his hand outstretched in a greeting. Actual boats have been found in tombs beginning in the 6th dynasty, some small scale, but others full scale. The final destination for the pharaoh was Aru, the field of reeds, or the field of offerings, an idealized version of the fertile Nile River banks. The field of reeds was located in the east, where the sun rose, and it offered flowing streams, verdant trees, and plentiful hunting and fishing. There was no illness or sorrow there. The social hierarchy from this world was preserved in the afterlife, so pharaohs remained pharaohs and commoners remained commoners, although their afterlife was significantly more comfortable than their earthly life had been. In addition to the mythologies about the pharaohs found on papyri, public inscriptions, and tomb decorations, there were also hidden mythologies embedded in the very titles of the pharaohs. The word pharaoh means great house, referring to the king's palace. Gradually, over time, it came to refer to an individual. In the 15th century BCE, under Thutmose III, it began to be used as the form of address for the king, who at that time was also considered the son of Ra. We know that Amenhotep IV, also known as Akhenaten, was addressed as pharaoh in the 14th century BCE. The title itself implied a mythology about the pharaohs. They were part of a divine lineage that traced itself back to Ra, the sun god. Other epithets were often included along with the names of pharaohs. Epithets functioned as a kind of a shorthand, linking the ruler to specific mythologies, linking the pharaoh with specific gods. For example, by the New Kingdom period, a ruler could have as many as 5 titles. One of the pharaoh's titles was known as his Horus name, a title that reminded everyone that the pharaoh was understood as the current manifestation of Horus to his people. Now, as Horus's manifestation, he was part of the Horus mythology, especially the defeat of Upper Egypt and the unification of the kingdom. Various titles given as Horus names included Horus the Strong, Horus the Fighter, and Horus, Lord of the Sun. One title was the Golden Horus name, also known as the Golden Falcon name. Now, this title referred to the king's divine status. The gold referred to may have been a reference to the sun's golden rays, or to the idea that divine bodies, and therefore the pharaoh's bodies, were made of gold. The gold sign may also be a reference to Nupt, said to be the city of Set, which was known as a plentiful source of gold. So the Golden Horus name referred simultaneously to the divine status of the pharaoh and to his command over the wealth of natural resources within the lands of the unified kingdom. Similarly, rulers took on Nebti names, which associated them with the goddesses of Upper and Lower Egypt, Nekhbet and Wadjet. Like the Horus name, this name broadcast some specific quality that the pharaoh possessed that came from his link to the goddesses. Interestingly, a few myths developed about commoners as well. One of the most famous is Imhotep, who lived in the 27th century BCE. Imhotep was chancellor to the pharaoh and a high priest to the sun god in Heliopolis, so he occupied a critical administrative, political, social, and cultic position. Despite this exalted position, however, he was a commoner. Imhotep wrote a medical treatise that's remarkable for its scientific rather than magical approach to healing. And he's also known as the first architect in history. Imhotep was so influential that he was elevated to the status of a deity after his death. And mythology about his life was developed to support the idea that he had in fact been divine all along. Now, this is highly unusual. Most commoners had no hope of ever rising in the social hierarchy, let alone enjoying being elevated to divine status. Imhotep's mother was a mortal, but she was elevated later to semi-divine status by claims that she was the daughter of Bene-Abjedet, an ancient Egyptian ram god. Alternatively, Imhotep's mother was sometimes said to be Sekhmet, a war goddess and the consort of Ptah, the creator god according to Memphis theology. This mythic genealogy justified Imhotep's title as son of Ptah. Imhotep is also said to have helped end a 7-year drought. Another text describes Imhotep rescuing his young sister from a king who tries to take her for himself. The mythological genealogies and other stories provide justification for Imhotep's eventual elevation to the status of god. A handful of other commoners over the centuries received similar treatment, enjoying mythological stories of their origins and their achievements in order to justify their elevation to divinity. For the most part, however, most commoners remained in the social station they occupied at birth, never daring to dream that they would enjoy either the earthly life or the afterlife existence enjoyed by the pharaohs. Pharaohs were not simply the object of mythology. From time to time, certain pharaohs spread mythologies themselves. One of the most extreme examples occurred when King Amenhotep IV took the throne in the 14th century BCE. About 5 years into his reign, Amenhotep changed his name to Akhenaten, meaning living spirit of Aten, referring to the god Aten, whom Akhenaten tried to elevate to the level of a single supreme god. Akhenaten also changed his epithets. His Horus name became Strong Bull, Beloved of Aten. His Nepti name became Great of Kingship in Akhet-Aten, the new city that Akhenaten had built. And his golden Horus name became Exalter of the Name of Aten. Inscriptions and images created during Akhenaten's reign minimize and sometimes completely exclude references to gods other than Aten. In fact, we know that he ordered that the names of gods, particularly that of Amun, the central Egyptian deity at the time, to be removed from public monuments and even from some private tombs. Akhenaten also ordered that the name of Aten was no longer to be represented by the hieroglyph of a sun, but instead to be spelled out phonetically. In making this change, Akhenaten was trying to change the view of Aten as just a sun god to an abstract, universal, all-encompassing presence. Under Akhenaten, the great hymn to Aten was composed. This is an extended poem that celebrates Aten as the single creator god. This tribute describes Aten's deeds and qualities as the sole god who created all things, the earth, animals, vegetation, and people. He is also solely responsible for setting each man in his place and for determining his lifespan. One section reads, "O sole God, there is no other like you. You created the world according to your desire while you were alone. All man, all cattle, and wild beasts, whatever is upon the earth, crawling upon feet, and whatever is on high, flying with wings." In celebrating this new version of the singular solar deity, Akhenaten seems to have suppressed mythology about Osiris, the netherworld, or a life after death. The hymns, stelae, and temple decorations produced under Akhenaten's rule don't include references to anything other than the present realm. Akhenaten himself replaces Osiris as judge of the dead. What doesn't change in all of this is the unique status of the pharaoh. The great hymn to Aten describes a son who is born from the god Aten's body. This son, who is named as the pharaoh Akhenaten himself, has been given Aten's strength, and he upholds Aten's ways. He's charged with maintaining Mot, and he's recognized within the poem as Lord over Upper and Lower Egypt. The great hymn of Aten lays out a mythology that resonates with previous Egyptian creation mythology, but makes Aten the sole creator. With this mythology, it seems that the pharaoh Akhenaten was attempting to make a tremendous change to the religious worldview of Egypt, promoting the elevation of one supreme deity, the sun deity, over others. It may, in fact, have been an extreme expression of faith in the sun's dependability and its importance in Egyptian life. Some scholars have argued that Akhenaten was even trying to go further, to establish monotheism. Some have even claimed that this was the first time in recorded history that a new religion was established. Well, Akhenaten's changes failed to take hold, and after his death, the preeminence of Amun was swiftly reestablished under the rule of his own son. But the mythology that Akhenaten left behind is important as an artifact of one man's attempt to change the worldview of an entire people. And it's from the tomb of his son, Tutankhamun, that we've learned so much about the lives and the deaths of Egypt's pharaohs. The last pharaoh of Egypt was Cleopatra. Cleopatra VII Philopator was the daughter of Ptolemy XII Auletes. She came from the Greek royal dynasty that had ruled Egypt since the time of Alexander the Great. And above and beyond her familial roots, she described herself as a reincarnation of the goddess Isis. As we all know from the Elizabeth Taylor movie, Cleopatra became Julius Caesar's lover, and she bore him a son. After Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE, Cleopatra then became the lover of the Roman general Mark Antony. Shortly after Mark Antony was defeated in battle, he committed suicide, and Cleopatra followed suit. According to Plutarch, Cleopatra found an asp hidden in a basket of figs that was brought to her. After eating a fig, she held out her arm and let the asp bite her, and she was found dead with her handmaiden dying beside her. Upon her death, her son attempted to replace her as pharaoh, but the Roman ruler Augustus Caesar had him assassinated. In order to strengthen her position in Egypt while she was in power, Cleopatra commissioned artwork that portrayed her as the goddess Isis, associating herself with motherhood and with magical power. And this identification lasted even into death. Egyptologist Kathleen Martinez claims that Cleopatra wanted to be buried with Mark Antony in Egypt, so that together they could embody the Isis and Osiris myth. Martinez notes, after their deaths, the gods would allow Cleopatra to live with Antony in another form of existence, so they would have eternal life together. Cleopatra died in 30 BCE. With her died the 3,000-year-old line of Egyptian pharaohs and the mythology that surrounded them. Well, maybe not entirely. Some pharaonic mythology continues to this day. There's a colorful body of mythology attached to King Tutankhamun's tomb even to this day, focused on the so-called curse of the pharaohs. According to this myth, anyone who disturbs an ancient Egyptian mummy, especially the mummy of a pharaoh, will suffer severe illness or sudden death. The mythology of this curse became particularly popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, particularly around Howard Carter's discovery and excavation of King Tutankhamun's tomb. Make what you will of the following claims. Several members of the team attached to the King Tutankhamun archaeological site died unnatural deaths or became hurt or ill in strange ways. First, a cobra, the symbol of the Egyptian monarchy, was found coiled in Howard Carter's bird cage, with Carter's canary in its mouth. Purportedly, this incident occurred the very day that Carter opened the tomb, and it sparked rumors of a curse that would plague anyone who violated an Egyptian tomb. Then, Lord Carnarvon, the man who financed Carter's excavation, died completely unexpectedly, 6 weeks after Tutankhamun's tomb was opened. He'd been bitten by a mosquito, and the bite became infected. He died of blood poisoning. Interestingly, 2 weeks before Lord Carnarvon died, a piece had been published in the New York World magazine warning that dire punishment would befall anyone who violated a sealed tomb. In 1925, Carter gave his friend Bruce Ingham a paperweight when he visited the Tutankhamun tomb. The paperweight supposedly included a mummified hand and a bracelet with an engraved warning, "Cursed be he who moves my body. To him shall come fire, water, and pestilence." Soon after that, Ingham's house burned down, and after it was rebuilt, it was destroyed again by a flood. Finally, Carter's personal secretary was found smothered to death in his own bed. Whether or not King Tutankhamun's tomb was really protected by a curse, the inscription of protective curses on the walls of pharaonic tombs was pretty common up to the time of the Old Kingdom. Now, few of us today believe in their actual power, and famed Egyptologist Donald B. Redford has declared that the so-called curse of the Pharaohs is nothing more than unadulterated claptrap. Yet the fact that we all eagerly listen to these stories suggests that this claptrap still captures our so-called modern imaginations. The ancient Egyptian myths celebrate larger-than-life figures who straddled the human and the divine realms. The pharaohs themselves have passed away, but the mythology that surrounded them lives on in subsequent ages. I picture them still, standing upright in the ferryman's boat, faces set with determined expressions and arms outstretched toward a heavenly future. The true afterlife for the pharaohs may be the mythology they left behind for us.